wants to go to Hollywood? Hopefully nobody, because that place is a complete mess full of douchebags, crazies, and people who like to chop up others. Still, people from all over the world go to LA to seek their fame and fortune, even if it takes getting their guts spilled out or sleeping with Harvey Weinstein. Which, personally, I take my guts spilled out.
Congratulations, you 5 ladies no longer have to pretend to be attracted to Harvey Weinstein.
Elizabeth Short was no different and wanted to try her hand in the world of movie making and push her way to the top using her good looks and charisma. Apparently someone didn't like this because they decided to tie her up and chop her in half. This way, not that way. Her death has become very famous, occurring all the way back into 1947, and is still considered one of America's biggest crime mysteries. The Black Dahlia murder has been yet to be solved, which brings me to the goal of today. We'll be going over the murder and the evidence that we still have access to and see if we can uncover what kind of person that the authorities should look for if a crime like this were to happen today. A crime like this, you have to be highly observant of what led to her death and all of the actions that occurred during the crime. In order to understand who killed her and why, you need to put yourself in his mind and analyze the actions that he has shown in his work. How he killed his victim will allow you to understand what he was thinking and what drove him to commit this act, and overall what kind of person the authorities should look for. A crime like Elizabeth Short's throws leads left and right, and 90% of them are horseshit. A young Hollywood girl's death gets publicity like nothing else, and everyone wants to get a piece of the action. The only way we can find our unsub is by looking at information we know directly comes from him. That is why the crime scene is a very crucial part of this investigation. If more bodies drop that you can tie to him, this can also help. It can also help if he likes attention and will toy with the press by sending him pieces of information that links him directly towards the crime. While we can see copycats and opportunists trying to get attention or money from these situations, if we have some kind of signature or details that aren't public record that link him directly to the crime, we can be sure that it is actually the killer. Elizabeth Short was last seen entering the Biltmore Hotel on January 9th and was found 6 days later by a mother and her daughter walking past the dump site. The body was severed from the waist around the lumbar spine in a medical procedure known as a hemicorporectomy. This incision showed minimal bruising along this bit, showing that this was done soon after death. She was drained of all blood through a slit across her throat after the suspected cause of death of a cerebral hemorrhage. Along the body there was also several lacerations and pieces of missing flesh that were all done with a butcher's knife. While this creates a horrific scene, each detail shows a piece of what the unsub might have been thinking and each action that led to the death of Elizabeth Short. Before we look into the why, we should look into the how and pinpoint each detail that could indicate a certain killer. First, as she was last seen entering the Biltmore Hotel, we'd want to look into anyone who had access to the hotel and maybe even her room specifically. This could be staff, guests, or those with a personal connection to Short. While it's possible that she did leave the premises during that time, looking into anyone who had access to the hotel would be a good place to start. Considering the body had evidence of a possible rape and some sort of sexual aspect, we can assume that the unsub was a male, and just based on the time period, he was probably white. So, as of now, we're looking for a white male who had access to the hotel at that time. This could be dozens of suspects right now, so to narrow it down a little bit, we should look a little bit closer at the crime. Since the hemicorporectomy was a medical procedure performed on Short, we can assume that the unsub had some kind of medical experience, and the fact that he had a butcher's knife, maybe even butcher experience. With this information, we can already narrow down our suspect pool to maybe less than 10. 90% of the time, murders are committed by someone who knew the victim, and in this case, I believe that this follows just based on the extreme passion behind the crime and lack of related murders afterwards. She was clearly held captive and tortured for several days before she was eventually killed. In this time, we can assume that she was raped and cut up in several places for whatever the reason the unsub might have had for her. My instincts tell me this was to draw out some sort of confession. Supposedly she had a habit of going to several bars and clubs, hanging with people of both sexes, and even transitioned to prostitution after her struggle in Hollywood. If we're sure that she had never left the hotel on the night of her disappearance, we can assume that the killer is a possible overnight guest or someone who was even turned down. We would want to verify accounts of her whereabouts in the past few weeks and talk to multiple people and see if we can get an ID on anyone who matches the profile. This person would very likely have a previous record of violence and possibly even rape. About a week after Short's body was discovered, press received little souvenirs from the suspected killer where he gave her the name of the Black Dahlia, based on her previous movie, The Blue Dahlia, and she liked black. The pieces received made this seem very likely to be the real killer and was washed with kerosene, kind of giving me the feeling that he was somewhat germophobic and even obsessive compulsive, just based on everything that we've seen so far has been highly clean. And this is the 40s. Looking back on the other pieces we have, I guarantee he has some form of ASPD. And I sense that he has a little bit of jealousy in this crime, so I get the idea that the unsub has some form of borderline personality disorder, following the intense and graphic scene we were presented with. So as of now, we are looking for a white male who has some sort of medical experience, maybe even butcher experience, with a personal connection to Elizabeth Short. We also want to make sure that we keep note of any previous record of anyone who fits this, and also see if he'll freak the hell out if no one washes their hands after he touches a doorknob. Only issue is that LA is a very big city, and there is even a chance of our guy fleeing the area. So, how do we lure him out? Considering that he went out of his way to send in proof that he was the killer, and ensuring that her body was found, we can assume that he was still fixated on the crime and wants to be in the middle of anything Black Dahlia. We can take advantage of this and stake out any kind of memorial service and also ensure that the press follows her funeral so we can see anyone who shows up and match our profile. Even better, we can create a sign-in sheet with a bottle of Germ-X right next to it, so anyone who comes in there, we can take note of anyone who uses it after the pen. Could also just keep the Germ-X away from everyone, so that way we can see if anyone gets really uncomfortable when they can't use it. There are other strategies we can possibly use to lure him out and catch him off guard, but this can already narrow down our list of suspects and maybe even get an ID on our unsub. So, who did kill her? Was it the psychotic cab driver Robert Manley? Maybe it was a nightclub owner whose name appeared on multiple of her belongings or was sent to the press, Mark Hansen. Who knows? Maybe it was Professor Plum with the rope in the ballroom. Like I said, this murder has horseshit leads everywhere, so our best bet is to look into anyone that we can link into the crime and see who fits. We won't be able to get a definitive answer just because we're going over century-old information. Ideally, we would want to sit down with each suspect and see if we can get them to crack, but since they're likely dead already, that's not really an option. We do have one suspect that we can link to Short that has a history of sexual violence and a similar incision that we saw in Short's body. This man's name was Patrick O'Reilly. O'Reilly was a doctor who knew Short through Mark Hansen and frequented that same club. He was also one sadistic motherfucker and got off on nearly beating his secretary to death in a motel room, which we know that Short's cause of death was blunt trauma to the head. Another piece that we could possibly use to link him to the murder of the Black Dahlia is the fact that he was married to a police captain's daughter, possibly helping him avoid capture. While he fits the profile very well, there is another subject that most people tend to believe to be the true killer. Dr. George Hodel is another physician, but we don't have complete assurance has a connection to Short other than a witness claiming them to have possibly been lovers, or Short even taking Hodel as a prostitution client. Supposedly, Hodel had slept with a professor's wife while in college and desperately tried to get her to stay with him, showing me possible signs of BPD, along with his multiple failed marriages. He had an interest in sadomasochism and shagging any woman he could possibly lay his hands on, including his own daughter, where we get her history of sexual violence and my gun in his mouth. Out of his shit ton of kids, 2 of them have publicly stated their beliefs of him being the Black Dahlia murder, even though his son did make a lot of money for saying that daddy was a serial killer. There are also photographs that were found and belonged to Hodel, having one of them depicting a possible nude Elizabeth Short. Hodel was highly intelligent, following the clean and careful nature of the crime, also fitting our profile. Like I said, I can't sit down with these individuals and force a confession out of them as much as I would like to send both of them to the electric chair, so we can't be certain for which, if either of them, even killed Short. What we can be certain of, however, is that both of them are pieces of shit and fit the profile pretty well. Just looking at this crime, I'm quite certain that this was not just a one-and-done murder. Whoever our unsub was, I am fairly certain that he is responsible for more lives than just the Black Dahlia.